Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Before we start, I do want to say we are filming this whole panel discussion. If you do not wish to be on camera and do not wish to see yourself on the internet or on TV, then please sit at the back because we are filming this. So this is the second in our series of Community Matters, Civil Discourse at the Library. Just by way of introduction, why are we doing this? The Monterey County Free Libraries, our mission is to bring ideas, inspiration, information, and enjoyment to the community. We are also increasingly a community hub and meeting place for the public. And in these times, when any disagreement seems to degenerate into name-calling and cheating sound bites, policy decisions are based on who has the loudest voice rather than serious informed discussion, present company accepted. Our mission of bringing ideas and information becomes more important than ever. So we will be discussing various topics of current interest with leaders and policymakers, and this series is going to continue over the next year for sure, and hopefully longer than that. Our last panel on the hashtag #MeToo campaign was standing room only and a great success. And I can tell we have a very engaged audience today also. So really, thank you so much for coming. I hope you will participate. And one of the things on the chair, all of you probably seen, we have little green sheets and white sheets. We would like you to fill out evaluations at the end. Also, if you have questions, if you can just write them, and we will have staff members going around who will take the questions. It's not that we don't want you to ask the question yourself. We have limited time, so we're really trying to cover as many topics as possible. So we really appreciate it if you write your questions in advance and let us call you when we take questions. Okay, so a couple of ground rules before I start. The focus here is on civility and sharing opinions. And this is for the public too. Please let the panelists speak. We will do the questions at the end. That's very important. We will use a question and answer format. I will be facilitating today and will address questions to the panelists individually or as a group. In order to cover as much ground as possible and give everyone a chance to be heard, we request that panelists limit themselves to 2 to 3 minutes for each answer. And what we'll try to do is maybe address questions to a couple of you, and then if you want something to add, just that's fine. And again, just try to remember, think of your questions, and we will take them from you. And with that, I am going to now introduce our panelists. So we have, sitting right in the middle there, Supervisor Mary Adams. So Mary Adams has led a 30-year career of public service solving problems for local families. Elected in 2016 as the 5th District Supervisor of Monterey County, in her very first year, she proved herself a capable advocate on issues ranging from disaster and economic recovery to land use, to creative solutions to our county's housing and homelessness crisis. Prior to being called to serve and lead, Mary served as President and CEO of the United Way of Monterey County for 14 years. So many of you probably know her from that too. She has also held senior leadership positions at the American Cancer Society and the American Heart Foundation, where she took on big tobacco, thank you, and helped save hundreds of millions in funding for public health programs and reduce tobacco-related illness and death in California. And we also have Mayor Joe Gunter. Now, Mayor Gunter was elected as Mayor of Salinas in November 2012. After serving his country in the United States Marine Corps, Joe Gunter returned to Salinas and joined the police department in Salinas in 1969 and retired after 32 years as a police officer and detective. Joe is the first police officer ever elected to the position of mayor in Salinas. Joe has always been involved in community events and served 6 years as Director of Security for the California International Air Show. He is now the past president of the Air Show, having served 2 years as president. He sits on the board of the Central Coast Federal Credit Union and is the chairman of the Supervisory Committee, responsible for reviewing and signing off on millions of dollars in loans. I will talk to you later.
See a new car in her future. Her husband will be looking for you.
He is the past president of the Women's Crisis Center for Monterey County and has been a volunteer for the California Rodeo and Alyssa Youth Sports turn my page here, for over 30 years. For many years, he was on the board of the Bobby Sox as a coach and served as president of the organization. You can tell you really have to hold this close to your mouth. We also have Elliot Robinson. Elliot is the director of Monterey County's Department of Social Services. His work on homelessness includes delivery of the county's public assistance, employment, child welfare, and senior services programs. Over the past few years, the Department of Social Services has been successful in building a CalWorks housing support program in partnership with the Housing Resource Center, establishing shelters in partnership with Community Homeless Solutions and Community Human Services, establishing the Safe Parking Program with One Starfish, establishing transitional housing programs for former foster youth with Peacock Acres, and extending foster care for non-minor dependents to age 21, and much, much more. Thank you, Elliot. And we have Katherine, who has worked in the nonprofit sector for more than 20 years. For 15 years, she was the executive director of an HIV/AIDS housing nonprofit, and for the past 5 years, she has served as the executive officer of the Coalition of Homeless Services Providers. The coalition is a group of private and public organizations working together to address the complex issue of homelessness in Monterey and San Benito counties. The coalition serves as the Continuum of Care Coordinator, manages the local homeless management information system, operates the coordinated assessment and referral system, spearheads homeless census activities, and assists in coordinating cross-jurisdictional responses to homelessness. And sitting right here on my right is Alyssa, also known as Red. Alyssa is an 18-year-old homeless youth who has been receiving services at Community Human Services Safe Place for a little over a year. She is a Monterey native who is self-determined and resilient. She is currently attending Monterey Peninsula College part-time and Pacific Grove Adult School, where she is working toward getting her GED. Alyssa's primary focus is doing well in school and pursuing a career as an X-ray technician. More recently, Alyssa applied for the Youth Assistant Night Monitor position through the Youth Mentoring Program at Safe Place. Alyssa continues to amaze Safe Place staff with her positive outlook, incredible courage, and endless potential. Thank you. So thank you so much to our panel, and with that, I'll start. And the first thing I actually want to say is, I'm probably dating myself here, but there was a time when every third young boy would dress up as a hobo at Halloween. And I think some of you might remember that. The image was a romanticized one of a man with a bottle at the end of a stick propped on his shoulder, and he was seen hopping on and off trains, often with a hip flask in one pocket. We're much more sensitive in our choice of Halloween outfits these days, but more importantly, people are finally realizing of the homeless, it is not just adult men or irresponsible drunks, but a spectrum of ages, old, young, male, female. So, with that, just so those in our audience who don't know, or would just help all of us, is to understand the extent of the program. I'm going to ask all of you to answer this question and say, can you describe some of the variety of homelessness situations you see in your current position or job, or at what are some of the myths about homelessness in Monterey County that need to be debunked? And I'm going to start with you, Alyssa, put you on the spot.
Oh, okay. Okay, I think this works. All right. Well, I can speak for myself personally. I'm not homeless due to being an addict or anything related to drugs. In terms of that, it was more of a bad situation with my family and them just not being understanding of the drama that was going on in our family. So I think the stereotype of, like, kids just becoming, rebellious or trying to just do drugs and things like that, it's not always necessarily true, because me, myself, I was never about that scene, and I still got kicked out, and I'm still out here on the streets. But that's definitely one myth that should be debunked, yeah.
Thank you. One thing I think I've learned as being the mayor, having been an officer, I dealt with some of our homeless people. It was a different time in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. These were generally men. They were generally drunk. They didn't have a job. They had gotten divorced, and the wife said, enough of this guy, and probably rightfully so. Now we have families. I have veterans. I have small children. I have people that have alcohol problems. I've found mental health issues, people that have gone through some hard financial times, and they're out there, and it's not a one-legged stool anymore, folks. It can happen to anybody, and I know people that have lived in Toro Park in some of the nicest houses, and are now out there on the homeless issue, caused by a variety of these issues. So it's not one fix-all for all. And I think the bottom line is, these are human beings that need our help, and sometimes people say they don't want our help. Well, we're just not offering it in the right position.
Thank you, Jayanti, for bringing us all together to address this issue that I think is a really important one to all of the districts and our entire county. I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about debunking some of the myths around homelessness, because there are many of them. And one of them is that homeless people are simply unemployed and they don't want to work. In fact, 25% of homeless people are employed full-time. In addition to that, 43% of the homeless people report financial issues as the condition that led to their homelessness. 67% of the people who are homeless are 25 years or older. So you broke the mold on that one.
Not a great.
Those are just a couple of the points that I think are important for us to look at. And as we talk about the different kinds of homelessness that I personally have seen, many, the people who are living 2 or 3 families to a single family dwelling is one example. And then women that I know who are living in their cars. Part of the 25% of women who are employed full-time are living in their cars, finding places to go to shower and to clean up. And they look just like the rest of us. And that's one of the other looks at homelessness. Thank you.
Yeah, and we do see many in our libraries also who come in during the day. Yeah.
I just started saying, people, neighbors experiencing homelessness, it's hard to say what type of people. Oftentimes we want to categorize people in different places. But, I think when you look at any of us, we're all unique. And we all have our own stories. And I think that's true for people experiencing homelessness as well. And you can see people will make a stereotype, and I just don't think the stereotype fits. I can say even, professionally, through social services, oftentimes we're dealing with people who have issues around, their finances. Sometimes they may have mental health issues. Sometimes they may have complexities, but that's only a small subsection. And when you look at the cost of housing that impacts young people, on a personal level, I know probably 4 or 5 young people who have had to make the decision to live in their car because they're earning $10, $11 an hour, which will not pay for our local cost of housing. I've seen old people, elderly people, disabled people whose rent went up, who lose their Section 8 voucher, maybe if they have a Section 8 voucher, and are reaching out to find support with finding housing, which is close to impossible. I've seen people with substance abuse challenges. I've seen people who are not competitive enough to find a job. There are lots of issues that will lead to homelessness, but underlying it all is the phenomenal cost of housing and the lack of housing stock. And so, when I think of people experiencing homelessness, really to categorize them, they're people who don't have housing.
The last thing I need is a microphone. So just to put it into context for everybody here, on any given night, our statistics tell us that there are approximately 2,800 people who are homeless in Monterey County. That does not include people who are doubled or tripled up. That number is not captured in the data that I'm telling you about. And out of those 2,800 people on any given night, approximately 24 to 25% of them are living in an emergency shelter or a transitional housing program. But 75% of them are considered unsheltered, which means it's someone who's living in a place not meant for human habitation. So that's the person in the encampment, in the tent, living in their car, living behind Save Mark, in the, in the forest behind, in Pacific Grove, in the alleyways, in the doorways of our community. And I echo everything that everybody has said here about kind of the composition and the complexion, if you will, of homelessness. It's anybody. I tell people all the time, if you're that older woman and you're living in Georgia and we can help you get your Social Security, then you're going to be able to rent a modest apartment. You're going to have to live frugally, but you can live. Here, that will not even buy you the price of a room for rent. With the cost of housing being so expensive and the inventory being so low, the only true solution is developing truly affordable housing in our community, spread through jurisdictions with equal burden. And then one last thing about the myth, there seems to be some myth that Monterey County serves as a magnet to pull people in from other places, to our community. But the truth of the matter is, up to 83% of our homeless population comes from Monterey County. So there are our friends and our families and our moms and our dads and our kids and our sisters and our brothers and our neighbors. And we, many of us, I will say among myself, we are one paycheck away. And that's just the reality of where we live.
Thank you. And so actually, going right off your statistic about 2,800 people being on the, unsheltered in Monterey County. So right now, we say that about 500,000 people experience homelessness in all across the U.S. That's about 17 out of every 10,000 people in the U.S. And in California, the average is exactly double that. So we are much higher than the national average. This rate also increased for the first time last year since 2010. So why the crisis now? And why is it worse than, say, during the economic crisis? Why is this now? And actually, I'll address that to you, Katherine.
Well, there are many different, meanderings about what the reality is. Some schools of thought say that by the time the Great Recession ended, it had already had a great flux of people into homelessness who have not been able to pedal their way out, right? The Western states are hugely impacted, much more than the other states in the country. There's an increase of trauma that happens. Even if you're not traumatized when you become homeless, the actual experience of being homeless can traumatize you. So now if you're not just a person who's now homeless because of economic reasons, now you're economically challenged and traumatized because perhaps you were sexually assaulted last night in your tent, right? The cost of housing is what is driving this crisis across the country. especially in the western states. People cannot afford to live. And once you lose that security deposit, once you go into your car, and then once your car gets towed because you lost all your stuff, now you're living in that tent. And to claw your way out of that is extraordinarily complicated and difficult. If that answers your question.
Yeah. Someone want to add to that? Elliot?
Well, just, that one theme, when you think of, the recession, which the recession really impacted people with very few assets, working people much harder than people who had more assets. If people with assets were able to hang on to them. If they didn't, they lost them. And, at the same time, the housing market started booming more than the wage levels. It's one reason why I think the California legislature wisely decided to act on the minimum wage laws, but still not enough to afford housing, particularly in coastal California, where the cost of housing is extreme. When you add that into that kind of the experience of from house to homelessness, and again, my mind today is on young people, although it could go anywhere, but I think of people who have to move in with roommates, which may or may not work, and they get locked into a potentially traumatic situation. And that carries trauma. That they're locked into is if you leave that situation, then you lose your housing. And if you lose your housing, you're on the street, and that's another trauma. And it's easy to have, when you're living on the street, to be grabbed by the anchors of mental health challenges, substance abuse, and they can lock you down. So you have that background, again, largely driven by the cost of housing. And where it's most acute really is in coastal California, where, for a number of reasons, we have challenges building the housing that's necessary to support the population that lives here and the population that has assets that want to move here. And you have all sorts of other challenges where housing comes off the market that's available to people or to people who live here for any number of other reasons, and I don't necessarily know that I want to tread into that world. But the issue is that the housing stock is very low, and we do have environmental challenges that lead to that as well. I wish it was raining more so that we could be secure in our water supply. There are lots of things that will drive it that we do need public policy to address.
So, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, because the irony is we live in a county that has all these amazing car shows and beautiful golf courses, and then we have the other end of the spectrum. So you talked a little bit about that, people who actually own houses. So do you think, and this is just a philosophical question that we receive, is that the ideal of the American dream is contributing to this people becoming homeless? People are finding themselves in serious debt while trying to get a college degree, or people are so focused on owning a home they cannot really afford. And we saw during the foreclosure crisis that a lot of people, this is what the result was. Do you think that this focus on maybe something that's not necessarily realistically achieved for everyone is part of the problem? And Mary, maybe you can start that.
Thank you, Jayanti. I do think that it is part of the problem. I think that in some ways home ownership might be grandly exaggerated. I think people would love to have a home, and I think it's wonderful if you can afford so. But I think that when you look at what we face here with this horribly inflated housing prices, and as Elliot said, and then the low stock of housing, I think if you really are looking at life and want to be here, I think that people need to accept the fact that they need to be in rental situations. I know that in some cities, in some jurisdictions, people have chosen to put rent controls in. so that once you're able to fit in, you're able to get into a place where you can live, you don't have to worry about getting handed out because the rent is going to be raised so much. So I think, that's something that some people have found to be helpful as far as being able to live. But I think homeownership may not be in the cards for everyone. And that doesn't mean a lack of success. It's simply an acknowledgement of where we are today.
Thank you. Mayor?
I think you brought up a very good point. We live in the land of Oz, is what I call it. We live in two separate worlds. People in my city, and they always talked about this lettuce curtain that was in the way, but people that provide the food, the people that provide the housekeeping at all these fine hotels, that cut the lawns, that cook the meals on the peninsula, live in my city, and they live on salaries that aren't sufficient enough to survive, even on our side of the hill. I may have a house for sale for $550,000, and the same house, after you cross over, is now $1.2 million. And people believe that's the way to go. Well, it's unrealistic when people are making minimum wage and they're surviving. And then you add 40,000 farm workers that are actually out in the fields producing this, some living in their cars, some living in hotels. I have an apartment that I found today. I've got a 2-bedroom apartment with 22 people that lived in it until the other day. And when you have that as an issue, now they've been moved because somebody complained and the landlord graciously put them on the street. They're just able to get by. And this is an issue that we have to figure out how to recognize. And I think the big thing is we need to create market rate housing. We need to create affordable housing. And we'll get into that in a little bit because we've been working real diligently in trying to create that. But the dream of all of us wanting to live in the big mansion isn't for everybody on what we want.
Thank you.
One quick note, you can move to Santa Clara County, a house that costs $500,000 here. It's $1.8 million up there. I talked to a young man today. He says it's great. His house payment is $7,500 a month, and his homeowners association is $2,000 a month. So I don't know how much money you can make to live there, but we don't have those residents here.
Yeah, we don't have those jobs in Monterey County, yeah. And actually, Alyssa, I'd love to hear from you, and also maybe you can address it from the student point of view of the cost of going to college.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say that was a big thing for me. When the reality hit me that I was actually homeless, because when I was young, I ran around with the kids that were on the streets and whatever, I was still living with my grandparents, and that was all good. But I think when the reality hit me that I was homeless, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't pay for a car, I can't get a house, I can't even rent an apartment with friends and get a car and pay for insurance and all that and go to school. It's kind of easy for me to say, because I live on the streets and, it's rent free, I don't have to pay rent, but I wouldn't have been able to pay it anyways, and it's kind of sad, my brother's sitting here not even a few blocks away and he still lives with my grandparents. He's got a military check and everything, but I'm still out here, and I think it's just I don't know, it's just frustrating, but I just think it's that people need to understand that it's not attainable. It's really not like getting that money. I'm struggling to get a job with Safe Place and Starbucks. They'll pay for schooling too, but it's just adding it all up. I don't have $1 million a year. It's not going to work.
And one of the challenges we hear also is because of transportation, that people, if they find a house that's affordable, you can't get to your workplace, without spending half the day on the road. So, yeah.
Just another thought, going back to something that Katherine said, and that is that when people are homeless and they finally are able to get into housing for whatever different program that might be out here helping, it is so much less expensive on the community as a whole to work to help keep that person in the home if they go through a bad patch and don't have the rent 1 month, or they can't pay the PG&E bill or something. It is so much less expensive to the community as a whole to augment their income in some ways, rather than to have them fall off the ladder and have to start all over again. So it's, you see it from both ends of the spectrum.
So actually this takes me to the next question, which is, I've heard the comment, it isn't the money, it's the availability of property, which is what we are talking about over here. But clearly it is both, because the rent increases far outpace the household income increases. So let's talk about the critical need to develop additional affordable rental units in the community. And by affordable, we are talking about rental units that could serve people in the 0 to 30% of the median income level, so specifically homeless as well as the poor and working poor. And related to this, how do we get more landlords and property management companies to participate in subsidized rental assistance programs? Because that's another challenge we hear of, because quite often we have the resources that can be used, but landlords won't accept it. So maybe Katherine, could you address that, please?
Yeah, I'd like to take the landlord piece of that. We have resources in this community that go unused. And it's not because they're not critically needed. And what I mean by that are things like the precious Section 8 voucher or housing choice voucher. Someone who has waited on that waiting list for years, and they finally, their number comes up and they get that precious resource. And they go out into the community and try to find a landlord to accept it, and the answer is no, 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 no. We have SSVF, rapid rehousing money, which is to help people who are homeless veterans. We have housing support, family stabilization programs that provide rapid rehousing or rental assistance for several months to help bridge people into permanent stability. But there are insufficient numbers of landlords who will participate in those programs. And they'll tell you a lot of reasons why, right? There's some misperceptions and myths in and about, the type of person who's going to come into my unit and all of that, which can be pretty quickly dispelled. But here's the reality. The reality is there's not a financial incentive if you're a landlord to accept the program, because typically it needs to fall into fair market rates, which are established by HUD, right, in Washington. So this is for the internet out there, right? So this is my plea. If you're a landlord or you're a property management company and you have a 100-unit, complex, we're not asking you to turn all 100 units, but just a couple, because every unit will count. If you will just participate, you will literally stabilize the lives of an individual or a family for the rest of their lives. And you can't get any better outcome than that. But we're trying everything. We've done television campaigns, PSAs, meeting with property management companies, looking at individual landlords. We have got to figure out a way to increase that stock of people, because we need to use every precious resource that we have in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. Elliot, do you want to address that a bit?
There are a few public policy challenges. One, at some level, it always strikes me, if you're a landlord, you want to see whatever the market will bear. And because of the supply issues, the market will bear high rents. If you're a homeowner, there's nothing you want to see more than your property value go up. And if you're from the public sector, where so much, and particularly local government, where so much of our revenue, our flexibility to deliver services, to operate, to serve the public, is also dependent on property taxes. There's kind of a conspiracy out there. It's not a conscious conspiracy, but it's a conspiracy of factors that works to drive up the cost of housing. And so there is that challenge that is really impacting the stock. And then, even if you harken back to Prop 13, where at some level there's probably no better tax-sheltered investment than a second property and a rental property, where it takes that property off the market for people who are interested in home ownership. and it keeps that cycle going. So there are a lot of factors that are driving coastal housing and making a challenge for those who are working.
Definitely, yeah.
I will say the politically sensitive term, and that is short-term rentals. And a lot of people firmly believe that short-term rentals are the reason that we have such an increase in homelessness. And I can see this from both sides. On the one hand, the houses that I've seen, legal or illegal, that are being used as short-term rental units are not the kind of houses that would be available for rent for anything other than a too expensive property. However, there are many, many, many places that we've seen in specific parts of my own district where there had been a garage unit, or there had been a granny unit, or there had been an extra little house on someone's property that people simply have chosen to put it on a short-term rental market rather than pulling it out of the housing stock. And I think those are the kinds of places that we are really seeing putting an additional strain on the housing stock that we have. Very limited but true.
Well, we've taken a little different approach in Salinas. And being the city, the big city, they keep telling me I worry about that. We've got some housing projects starting. We have a pen housing project, which is on Soledad Street, in the alleged worst end of my city, which isn't true. But there's going to be 7 units. We're going to break ground on that very shortly. And those are going to be for 0 to no income and 0 to none. And then there'll be some very cheap housing for folks that have no place to live. We also have some housing with Monterey County Housing Authority is going to be open shortly, 54 units that are affordable housing. And in our new plan for our housing, we're obligating our builders to build the affordable housing units. That's going to be a requirement, or they're going to be writing large checks and we'll build them. And we're not builders. But I think part of that is the community, we know what we need. And unfortunately, we're at the bottom rung of the economic deal when it comes to taxes from the homeowners that are paying property tax. Our money all comes from the federal government that we beg for. And I tell you right now, I have one of the people here that does the begging, Anastasia Wyatt from my city, who is a rock star when she can get money out of the federal government. While you're waiting for your taxes, she can get it. But that's what we have learned we have to do to make things better. And then we have to work on transitional housing to get the folks that need our help. And that's the approach we've had to take.
Mr. Mayor, can I just add something that I'm going to get garbled, but that I think the city's also done, is that in your housing element, you have a requirement that folks, that people, garbled that the development, they actually set aside units that will take the housing authority vouchers.
That's correct.
And I think that was a really progressive step, and I just want to say.
Great, and I think we should give Salinas a round of applause for that. Thank you. So I'm actually going to go into another aspect of this, is from the governing aspect of it. And this is now, without trying to sound completely insensitive, how do we manage the issue of balancing competing interests in communities? And I know this is something, especially those of you elected officials, face. So I'm just going to say, and I know as a law enforcement official we face this, so for example, we want to be sympathetic to the needs of our homeless population, but members of the community also want to have unimpeded access on sidewalks, or want to use the library without falling over large bundles of possessions, or not have to deal with feces in the river, or use needles on the beaches. I mean, this is a fact, and I know all of you hear this. So how do we deal with this issue? And I'd love to start with Mayor Gunter on this.
Well, we've taken a two-pronged approach to this. Yes, we have enforcement when there are people sleeping in people's doorways. We enacted a camping ordinance that we've had to rewrite a couple of times. Our goal is not to punish the homeless folks. And I call them these, it's almost like, you know, we talk about immigration and undocumented. Those are just people with questionable documentation. Homeless people are just people that have had a bad turn of events. So we've got to work with them. And then we have to deal with our business groups. And I get to meet with them on a regular basis and get an earful about how my homeless have caused them problems and are keeping people away. Well, that's not true. And so we've worked closely with our churches that have helped, and we can get the Christian communities to say, oh, those are our people too. And so we're starting to push harder with those folks, because guess what, if you're a business owner, you don't want to turn on a church. Because you're not going to beat Christianity down, okay? But people have been doing that for 1,000 years. So we've taken a little unique approach to this. I have a mayor's faith breakfast where I have 350 ministers, and we always talk about the homeless and what can we do as a community. And I think what it has done, and I think and I know Elliot does it on a regular basis, he avoids me because he knows I'm going to ask for money. But we as a community you've got to educate your business owners and the people who live in residences. Yes, the homeless can be a pain in the butt, okay? You have some that are out doing things that you don't want to be done in public. But you got to work with them. You've got to start figuring out how do we get them the services to help them, and how do we educate our business community on what the laws are and how we all have to work together. Because we're in this together. And this is just the haves and the have-nots.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to, I just wanted to say, or ask one question, just as like to a mayor even. I thought it was actually legally, it was illegal to be homeless in the county of Monterey.
It's not illegal in the city of Salinas.
Okay.
And I don't believe in the county of Monterey, and I'll let Mary answer that.
Okay, for sure.
It's just, it may seem that way with the laws that have been enacted.
Yeah.
And we see that with some of the motorhomes. In fact, people don't have a place to stay. And I've heard that people are putting them on buses and sending them to Salinas.
Yeah.
And they have, and I've met
absolutely.
them.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so actually, Alyssa, before, have you had to ever deal with any kind of situation where you were challenged for your homelessness or you were, penalized for it in some way?
Absolutely. Yeah, several times. In fact, I lost all of my personal belongings, including very, very memorable and meaningful things. I used to stay right on the dunes in Sand City, right by, it's now a 7-Eleven gas station, and literally right off the bike trail. And because they wanted to build a hotel, they decided, kick everybody else out, 6 months ahead of time. But the reason why they had come in was because other people down the road were literally, we called it the landfill, because it was so disgusting. It was horrible, and it makes me hurt because I'm an environmentalist. I love the nature, and it hurts to see things like that being disrespected. So I try to help all I can, but I see not penalizing people like sleeping in doorways or stuff like that. But in terms of trash and things like these, coming from me personally, they are being lazy. It's sad, but these people are just not putting in the effort to put it in the trash can a block or two away. And so that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. Thank you. Mary?
I do think it is really hard to try to balance. I don't think that there's anybody in this room who has come up with the magic bullet to help people understand homelessness. But I do believe that as long as we simply refer to people as the homeless, it's a vague concept. In my mind, we really need to name it. If you're homeless, I want to look at you, Alyssa. I don't want to look at you as the homeless. And I think when people start to put a name and a real face on people who are in homeless situations, they start to develop a kind of empathy that just, I think, erases some of the terrible barriers that exist.
Can I just say one more thing to that for sure? I have never been the type to not be in the community. I've done 4-H, I've been homeschooled, I've done sports, and I've loved it. I've been to Monterey High. I was born in Salinas. I've lived in Marina, and in the past year that I've become homeless, all 4 of my grandparents are teachers, all of them for the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District. And now all my teachers just kind of look at me weird, kind of, oh, poor thing, it's like, well, I'm not different, I'm not anybody changed, I'm still the same person, just because I'm not living in a home doesn't mean I'm a horrible person or, you know, a bad person, you know, like, I've said this a couple different times, like, being homeless does not define you, like, at all, so.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, we do talk about how we try to, you know, getting people to actually look. You know, we try to avoid, we look the other way, and that's part of our problem. We're really trying to just put the problem away. And that actually leads me to one of the things you talked about was that many US cities give thousands of homeless people one-way bus tickets out of town, including Santa Cruz, which, you know, we've heard about, or I read about last month. So there has been a problem of, you know, also recently about, say for example, and this is just a policy thing, Orange County recently took over their commission on homelessness. It used to be a commission that was had appointees from different social services groups. The board has now decided that every single one of those 19 people have to be appointed by the board and can be fired by the board. So there's no longer this kind of, you know, the public interest groups doing it. And they've also taken away their priority of affordable housing from the commission. So it's just interesting the way public opinion is going. So do you think this attitude of counties and cities simply trying to push their homeless population away instead of trying to find a local solution is a growing issue? And you know, do you? Well, yeah, and I was actually going to come right to you, Katherine. And you know, this idea of should we let some richer and more urban cities deal with the problem because they have more resources or the weather is better or whatever it is, and you know, could some cities will say this is an option that they like. You know, like you talked about going to Georgia, taking your little bit of money and going there is more affordable. So I know it's a many-pronged sort of a concept, but I'd love to hear what you all think about it.
Yeah, I am not an elected official, so I'm not speaking as an elected official. But from my observation, right, and oddly enough, I had 2 people from Santa Cruz come into my office just today who were put on a bus from Santa Cruz. And there tends to be 2 kinds of the bus transportation programs, right? One, in my opinion, is valid. The other one's not. The one that's valid to me is, you know, if you're working with someone and, you know, let's say, for example, they were struggling 5 years ago, they had a falling out with their family, but a lot of those situations have been resolved. They live in another community, and they can be reunited, right? Then to me it makes sense to put resources in to connect that local person here to their family in another community. That makes sense, right? What does not make sense to me, and which is just infuriates me, is the here we'll put you on a bus and just send you outside of our boundary. Because that is dishonest, it is cruel, it is inhumane, and all it does is it just moves people around. I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? And it just simply, you know, doesn't work. So that's what I have to say about the bus program.
Yeah, okay. I did see a lot of, yeah, go for
So
it.
just, you know, a couple things. I mean, one, actually, in our general assistance ordinance, I have, not ordinance, policy. I have authority to get someone a bus ticket. And I think in the last 17 years, I've done that twice. And both times what we make sure we do is make sure that person is connected with the family or resource that they're going to, just like Katherine says. There have been cases, and there's actually one big scandal where it was, I think it's Las Vegas or somewhere in Nevada, where they were buying mental patients in their mental health facility tickets to go to San Francisco.
Yes, right. And that was Las Vegas, yeah.
That is not what any jurisdiction should ever do. And to the extent we, you know, and I don't want to presume anything about any other community, you know, but if there is evidence, then that would be something, you know, I'd encourage you to share, and I would, you know, encourage our elected officials to escalate it as an issue, and if need be, escalated in the press as an issue. And about a broader side of the equation, there's this concept, and in my field, you hear about it, the race to the bottom. And you can see that, and there's a federal program called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. In California, it's known as CAVALS. And that was that's the Public Assistance Program for Families with Children. It used to be known as AFDC, commonly known as welfare. And back in 1996, if I remember my years right, the federal government changed it, made it very flexible, turned it into a block grant. You can use the money for a lot of things. And you can take your money that would support families living in the community and move it to child welfare, you can move it to marriage formation, you can do lots of things with that and not support people. And there are a lot of states that have done that. And, one of the interesting statistics that came out during the gubernatorial race, I can't remember which year it was, but I think it's candidate Whitman, who, I'm going to get the numbers garbled, but said, well, California has 20% of the population, but 40% of the population on welfare. And I want to turn that number around and say, nationally, it's somewhere like 12% of children in poverty are served through the TANF program nationally. California, it's something like 66%. And so you do have this challenge of communities enacting laws, right? That's a state level set of laws, where California sustained the basic sense of entitlement in the CalWORKs program. But you do have communities that can take various actions around how they're enforcing no camping rules. And there's a real public policy issue around encampments that, I know it's hard for people who are experiencing homelessness, but there are real public policy issues around public health. And you have to take those quite seriously. And that's why communities do have no camping ordinances. But if you're not kind of matching that with resources that around either shelter or access to housing or rapid rehousing, then you have a race to the bottom. And you are moving people from one community to other. And the hard part of that is the most compassionate community can suffer. And I think the solution to that really is all of you, is your voice. Is your voice both at the state level politics or local level politics and national politics. To make sure that kind of we can stand up and say that compassion is the right thing, that good public policy is the right thing, and that self-serving policies are not what's right for people.
Thank you.
I'm an elected official, and it's really nice, all the things that are being said, but we still have some voiceless people, and I would like to, if I may, in this democracy, I would like to make a statement.
So I'm going to just ask you to hold on just for a minute, because we are almost at the end of our panel questions, and we will then go into asking the public for questions. So Mary, did you have something you wanted to say?
The only thing I was going to add, and I feel like I don't even want to step on your words because they were so absolutely correct, is that I think what we are not doing that we need to do is a regional approach to homelessness. Because this pushing people from one side to the other doesn't work. When I was at United Way, and I think still, we partnered with Elliot to do the homeless survey. So the homeless census. And you could just see every other year, it'd be higher in Salinas, and then it would be more over the Monterey Peninsula. So we're just sort of shifting back and forth. But as long as we continue to view it city by city by city, I don't think we're going to get many places. We used to sit in this room, Katherine and sometimes Elliot, I, Robin, a group of us that were part of the Lead Me Home Coalition, the 10-year plan to end homelessness. And there were representatives from San Benito County with us, but I don't think anybody from Santa Cruz. Was Santa Cruz? I think it was just San Benito and we. But as we talked about different kinds of approaches to resolving the problem, we talked a lot. But, I just don't feel that there was the problem was so big that I don't feel we went very far with it. You know, you may have a different feeling about that, Katherine, but to me, it just seemed like it was such an enormous problem, and no one seemed to have the courage to just, you know, put down the stake and say, this is what we have to do. You know, I'm really proud that the city of Salinas and we at the county partnered together to do a temporary homeless shelter over on Alsell Street. And I'll tell you, it is fantastic. It really is. A lot of people went way out of their comfort zone to make this happen. The public defender was amazing. She, you know, pushed up her move date. The people who were working to make it possible, they did the work, you know, more quickly than normal. And it's a wonderful success. That partnership, I think, was really an important element.
Yeah, I would like to just add to that, because Mary, you're right. But I'm really happy and pleased to report that the courage has been found. So, you know, the Leadership Council, which serves as a local homeless continuum of care board, has been completely restructured in keeping with that exact premise that these responses need to be, you know, cross-jurisdictional, regional in approach, and that is well underway. So.
And you know, it's interesting, you talked about San Benito and Monterey County, so the COCs, that there are the large COCs, and among the smaller COCs, Monterey County has the third highest in the country.
Continuum
Oh, I'm sorry, I know, because Katherine had said continuum of care, sorry, that's why I said COC, okay, and I'm a librarian, we use acronyms all the time. But we are the third nationally in terms of the homelessness, and we are top among the smaller COCs in youth homelessness. And most people are shocked to hear that about Monterey County. We don't think that, you know, of ourselves that way. And now we've got the homicide rate and we've got now homelessness rate. I mean, this is not something to be proud of.
Let me give you another statistic that shows up for both under 18 housing. So if you go to kidsdata.org, I think, not kidscount.org, one of the two, which is kidsdata is the California-based measurement system, but Monterey County has the highest per capita number of youth experiencing overcrowded housing, and there was a recent another study. I can't remember what university it came from. Chico State, that was shared at the Housing Pipeline Committee of Weekly Home, that says for overall housing, Monterey County has the most overcrowded housing of any county in California.
Okay, and so we will quickly give...
yes. I'll try to make this quickly. We've had people send people on buses to Salinas from within our own county. And I've been blessed by knowing, because the MST drivers, they live in Salinas because they're not underpaid. So there is an advantage, and they have my office phone number, and they call and said, I'm bringing you 10 homeless people from another city. And I go, when are they coming to Salinas? So I met them at the bus, and they told me what happened. The bus was going back to that city in half an hour, so they each got $10 to go back from the mayor. And somebody said, the mayor must be rich. No, I said, the mayor thinks this is not right. And they said, you know, they left we got all of our stuff on the beach. That was what's so funny. They gathered them up off the street and just sent them to them. Well, I sent them back, and I've run into one of those people in that city. I won't tell you where it is. I almost slipped because I don't want to cause. But what I think is, and I'm going to recognize somebody else that's here. Wes White has been a voice for the homeless at our city council meetings on a regular basis. And he's organized folks, and we've had many meetings in my office, and people go, your friends are here, and I said, my friends, the 30 homeless people. But I think sometimes, as providers, we don't listen to the people that need the services. And sometimes, maybe we need to listen a little harder. And trust me, we've had some very pleasant and unpleasant discussions, but I think in the end, the results are starting to be seen. And I think that's what every city, every government agency's got to take the time and realize they're not our enemies, let's work with them. And some of those folks have some issues, but a lot of them are just people that need some answers to their problems, and we can help. Because we help people that and somebody said the car shows and golf tournaments. Hey, I've got the largest rodeo west of Mississippi. I got a California International Air Show, been in business a long time. Blue Angels, the Thunderbirds come here. We need to remind ourselves that these are our residents. We also have to take care of them.
And I think also the important thing is you have unpleasant and pleasant discussions, but they are honest discussions, and we need to do that. Did you want to add something, Alyssa? Okay, so, yeah, and you know, we had a lot more questions, but I do want to give the audience a chance to, do we have some of them? Yeah, do you want to bring them up to me? Yeah, and I'll give you a couple. You had do you mind using that mic, because then you can be heard on, and I'll give you 2 minutes if you don't mind, so we can give everyone a chance. And those of you who have questions, if you can just pass them down to staff, they'll come around and take them.
Which one are we at?
They don't have any, I'm sure the people can hear.
She needs the handheld mic to,
Okay.
that's not the right mic.
Oh,
Here, you just where?
that's good. Radio.
My name is Yvonne Stone. I'm an evangelist here in Monterey County, and I know why I'm not included in most of these kinds of conversations or at the table or whatever. This has been going on for years. I was in Fort Worth closed. My husband is a veteran. I'm a military wife. I'm also the executive director of the Fort Worth Environmental Justice Network, which was formed when the base closed, and we saw why people was becoming homeless. Nobody wants to talk about that. We have buildings all over Fort Worth that are not being used. We were put out of our units on Fort Worth without any kind of monetary help, without any place to go, and had to find our own housing. I have been working with our organization and that young lady over there for years, all over this county, going all across this nation, talking about the problem we were having here at Fort Worth with housing and with living wage jobs. The African American community is only less now than 3% on this peninsula. Nobody had talked about how the rents have been raised to keep on driving them out of their community, and the gentrification that's been going on here on the peninsula. Whether intentional or unintentional, this is what is happening, and it needs to be addressed. Whether you want to hear me say it or not, it's a reality. This is a reality that needs to be addressed. And rent control is something that I know that some people had started to work on years ago. Nobody wants it, but it has to be done. That's why we have this revolving door of homelessness. And we don't want to call people homeless, but if they don't have a home, they're homeless. We have people that we are talking to right now, veterans, the women and children who are living in transitional housing, people who have Section 8 vouchers. We have people who are talking to them in a position and being paid, and they are very rude to these people, and I'm quite sure that some of you at the table don't know what some of the employees are doing when they're turning people away to embrace their friends or other people who have other positions that some of the people don't have. This all needs to be addressed.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to address one of the issues. So there is which I'd love us to talk about, is the issue of race and the issue of gentrification that Ms. Stone brought up. And so I don't know if any of you would like to. How is race part of our whole problem of the homelessness issue in Monterey County? And I want to see. Katherine, is that something that you could address for us, or Elliot? Yeah.
Race and inequity plays a huge role in society, and is something that I know our board of supervisors and the city of Salinas have been participating in a group governing for racial equity. And it plays itself in plays out in many ways. If you think of, disproportionality in prisons, disproportionality in assets, disproportionality in, the foster care system. It's something that's a huge challenge. And when you look at disproportionality in assets, which has huge historical roots that live on to this day, it definitely drives to homelessness, whether it be homelessness among African Americans, homelessness among lower income white folks. We have a huge issue with overcrowded housing, largely in our Latino community. So race does play a role. And again, that's probably my personal philosophy. So much of that has to do with the history of asset building.
Okay, thank you.
And if I just follow along about parity of program enrollment, there has been some really pretty massive changes, in the last couple of years. There are many homeless programs now that are participating in what's called coordinated assessment or referral, which means that there is no longer the ability for a program to kind of cherry pick who gets in their program and who does not get in their program. And so that is a national initiative that we implemented a year and a half ago. And that has, I think, really helped a lot. And there's more work to do, of course, but that is one tool in the toolbox.
Thank you.
Can I just say something real quick? And this is not necessarily addressing the issue of homelessness, but as a younger generation and also growing up with very older grandparents, the whole race thing, it is not going to stop until it's not a thing anymore. You know what I mean? Like, there's these people, saying, the African Americans, are getting turned down. Well, you know what? I don't see a difference between you and me,
I don't see a difference.
So, but no, with people, saying that there's some prejudice against it, it's, that's not going to stop until you stop thinking there's going to be that, and
Okay.
yeah.
So we're going to keep moving to keep, do we have?
I'm an employee of Monterey County Free Libraries, and I'm representing a member of the audience who prefers not to be on camera. This is a woman who has a family of 3 children, one who's very sick today, and she's just trying to hear this answer before she takes her child to the hospital because he's not well, and we all know it's a 7:15, and this is a young family. She's a victim of domestic violence, has fled a situation that was really terrible. She lives on the peninsula. Her children are in school here. They're well adjusted. She has just got a job in the peninsula. She has a Section 8 voucher. She cannot find affordable housing with that voucher here. She has exhausted all of her temporary resources through charities and temporary housing options. And she's just at a loss. So she's asked, who can I specifically talk to? Is there a name that someone I can talk to? Because she does not want to return to a situation where she feels like, she could possibly, be killed if she returns to the situation. So she's looking for a specific name and,
Okay, and I think Katherine's putting out her card right now as we speak. And we can certainly get that to you in just a minute. I'm going to say we are strapped for time, so if you can keep your questions.
And Katherine can also add to this, but just the extent a family is CalWorks eligible, and I don't answer the question, but to the extent the family is CalWorks eligible, there's both a housing assistance program within CalWorks and we have the housing support program in partnership with Housing Resource Center, so that's another resource that I know Katherine can.
Okay.
There's a little bit of run up to the questions, but I'll keep it brief.
Yeah.
Robin McCray, and the question is for all. On any given night, there's 598 unaccompanied homeless youth in Monterey County, of which more than 90% are unsheltered. That's kids up to the age of 24, some as young as 10, unsheltered, unaccompanied. Their challenges are different than those of homeless adults, and we can't think of them as just young homeless people or homeless adults. Many are working to achieve educational goals. Many aren't even old enough to sign a lease. Many have no work experience or any experience with personal finances. Because they can't sign a lease, they have to rely on shelter or transitional housing or live on the streets. Rapid rehousing, low-income housing, homeless prevention, that just doesn't seem to apply to homeless youth. If they've never had a home, you can't, you can't do homeless prevention, you can't do rapid rehousing, and if you can't sign a lease, you can't do low income. So given this, what can our community do to provide more assistance to unaccompanied homeless youth, and how can we help them become independent adults?
So if one person, I'm going to ask one of you to take that. Anyone? Well, okay, so Alyssa, did you want to?
No, I want to.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll
no
give you
pressure.
2 minutes to make it easier for you. We have a long line of people waiting to ask questions, so.
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, I think there are so many places where people ask me questions, and I get the same question with around seniors who are on a fixed income, get to work, and the cost has just priced them out. The best I can say in all candor is for youth is connect with community human services in all candor. We have categorical programs. So for former foster youth, we do have a transitional housing program. And a lot of that is driven by financing and driven by challenges with financing. And it depresses the living daylights out of it.
And it's a really big, and I'm sorry, just given the format here, sometimes it's hard to go in depth into some of these things. But Mary?
Yes, just to add on to what Elliot was saying, Robin, specifically to you, I think that the solutions have to come from the people who are in the middle of it. And we as policymakers need to hear your voice so that we really understand what are your thoughts about the solutions to this. You work in it and you see it every day. You have far more knowledge than I do. So I just encourage your voice to be heard continuously. Don't give up. You've done so much. Just don't stop trying.
Thank you. And we're going to actually take 3 questions, so it's going to be, go ahead.
Can I just say one thing? As a homeless youth, because I can't sign for a lease or anything like that, you have to be, I think, 25, isn't it? To do anything like that, renting or owning a home. What do I do, right? But I think that Safe Place has just got a beautiful thing going. I can get into transitional housing and be there. I'm not sure for how long, but as long as I have a job and, going to school and things like that, I think that there needs to be more programs like Safe Place, because it is just, I wouldn't be the same person and where I'm at and the motivation as I would be today, without them. Like, they just give the motivation, and I think that is the real thing with homeless youth, because it's such a discouraging thing that once you're there, it's kind of like, oh, well, I'm so young, I might as well just give up now.
Well, I hope you won't, yeah.
Can I just say, actually, one other just plea to young people, and that's back to the question, make your voices be heard in the public conversation, make your voices be heard at the ballot box. When young people get out to vote, and when women get out to vote, we see differences being made.
And when women get elected, so we do need to do that too, so, yeah. Okay.
And sorry to my fellows.
Yeah, again, it's just,
Okay, well, actually, I wanted to address one thing before I went into my question. In regards to the housing vouchers and the transitional housing, part of the issue with that, first with the transitional housing, is you're getting a time limit, and a lot of people are getting kicked out before they can find another place on the voucher, which is the other issue. The reason why there are so many people not finding Section 8 housing is because the rental thresholds are not high enough. And I actually know both families and also special needs people with caregivers who are maybe $20 away from the threshold, or as a friend of mine, she has $0, and she normally gets a increase every year. So when she gets the increase in Salinas this year, she will not have housing. Or well, I should say, the person she takes care of will not have housing. So that's another part of the issue, even having the transitional housing, is that they're not given enough time, and if they're not able to find something, they still have to get out. But my question has to do with the fact that we have low-income housing on Fort Worth, both the transitional, low-income that's subsidized, and also the government housing for the government employees. What is not being addressed is the health issues that are occurring on Fort Worth, which have been ignored for a long period of time. Some of us just signed new leases on Fort Worth, and in those leases, it lists Prop 65. And we have been told for years that there's a Prop 65 designation because it's secondhand smoke, because there's cars going by. Well, if that were the case, then every single housing unit would have to have a Prop 65 designation. But it's not that. So in the lease now, there is a statement that says it's because of former activities by the military in the garrison, and that because of those activities, you could have things like cancers, deformities, etc. But they're not stressing that, and when you go and sign a lease, it's like sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. So you have people that are moving into these housing areas that have cancers, or that might be in remission, or that have other things they're dealing with that could end up getting sick from where they're living, but they don't have a choice because either a government employee, low income, or they're transitional. And so it's not being addressed. Also, the new issue is we now have carnivorous ants, which I found out have actually been there for years. And so now you have carnivorous ants biting children, but that's not being addressed either. So it's like we have the low-income housing, but it's like that low-income housing we're being given is not safe.
So is your question, what do we do about the situation?
Well, what is going to be done about the situation?
Okay.
I would suggest that issue, the health outcome issue, should be directed to Fora. As a talking point. And as far as transitional housing, I just want to kind of clarify that transitional housing is housing that is designed to provide up to 24 months, 18 to 24 months. And the goal is to, there are regulations that require people to move on. Now, the trick, though, is that from the program delivery level, is that from the moment someone comes into a transitional housing program, you're immediately working with someone to exit that program. And sometimes that can be done better, and there are systems in place right now to make that happen.
But what about the transitional housing for the reunited families? Like if a family lost a child because of a court case or whatever, and then they're granted custody of their children again, because that housing, which is on Fort Worth in Abrams, I believe is like only 6 months. And then they're having to scramble to find somewhere else to go. Or, yeah, because I've talked to some people.
The good news is we have our supervisor taking notes of it. and he's taking notes also. But I do want, we really do want to keep going over here. One of the things we do, once we wrap up, we can stay and continue to talk, but we really can take only 2 more questions at this point. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Berkeley, and I would like to thank you all for being here today. It's been enlightening and very necessary. I have 2 questions. Shall I keep them very short? But is that going to cut off somebody else's
Well,
question?
if you take one more person.
Okay.
Okay.
So 2 questions. One I think maybe a little bit shorter and is for Elliot. And this is the question regarding some of the policies you've mentioned. I'm just wondering if there's any type of incentive, tax or otherwise, for people to provide Section 8 or other housing.
From a housing perspective, there are incentives for building housing. And I honestly don't know how those tax credits work. I'm not a developer. My side of homelessness is more on the shelter side. There are also some tax credits for hiring people on public assistance. So from the employer side, there are credits for that. From another public policy side, there are the California legislature passed a host of measures this past session around homelessness to put and housing to fund programs. So, and one of their measures is going to come on the ballot, I think believe in November, or is it June? Which is a large housing bond. So I think, again, when I say people should vote, those are things that people need to pay attention to from a public policy perspective.
Thank you. It's always good to capitalize on what we can do as well as where the challenges are. This question is for Mary, and you mentioned a regional cross-jurisdiction approach. And so the question I have is, how can all the stakeholders be identified and brought together?
Well, I think that within each county, there would be someone who would be like an Elliot, who would tell us who the right players are to come to the table to deal with it. And people like Robin and Katherine who work with it. I don't find that as the insurmountable problem, reaching out and getting the people together. I find the next step the insurmountable problem, which is getting some sort of concurrence and agreement on how we should address the issue. Thanks.
Thank you. And one question.
Okay. So actually, someone from the network is going to be calling. Okay.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And if we can do one last question, is there?
Do you have a question, sir?
Well, I'm Professor Pilzer, okay? And the big question is, you don't know who I am. You don't know, I have no matters. No, you're kind of rude, okay? I'm here to help out here. Please sign some of these petitions, okay? In doing something to really out there. I'm the one that's out in the public, okay? Talking to people all day long, okay? And I have a nonprofit, which is a coalition. But I'm not even going to talk to you about it. I'm just really upset, okay? A coalition of young people becoming seniors before it's too late, okay? You guys have no idea what's going on out there, okay? I do. I've been all over the country, okay? I've been fighting to help the people, okay? But, it's nice that you can be, why don't you give out some candy too? That would be nice.
Well, I appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you. Do we have another question?
I have no question.
Thank you. Can you come closer to the microphone?
So I am an outsider because I live outside, and I have my own answers and solutions that I would like to share. If any of you would like to join me outside to sleep out underneath the stars, I would like to be able to read you a bedtime story and to have a conversation about the ancient story that we are all living in. It's a story that people have told over a fire for thousands of years. And I have a very high quality of life with the fresh air and the quiet moments. I have a lot of wealth that I would like to share in the way of time. So my question is really simple. Would you like to join me?
Thank you. And I think that's
You're welcome.
and I think that's a really good point for some to really talk about. Can we walk in someone else's shoes, and are we willing to really to share it with our full human beings? And it's a very good point.
I just want to address that. That's so awesome because I think the biggest thing is almost even a relationship issue. It's like, why don't you walk in my shoes? If you just, my grandparents, I'm sure if they knew the struggles that I'm going through, if they really cared deep down, they would never have done what they, to kick me out, And I think that in terms of finding solutions, I think that's a really good, awesome suggestion that I think that you'll find find it a lot easier to quickly come up with solutions if you put yourself in the situation, because it's like, oh crap, I'm here now, And so it's like, oh well, now I've got to get myself out. Then you can start thinking about getting other people out.
Thank you. And I know there are a lot more questions, and after we wrap up, you're welcome to stay and just speak and talk. If any of our panelists can stay. But, you have something to hand out? Okay, but I just want to say, I'd like to wrap up by, this is a very good point about this issue of how do we create a culture of empathy. What can we do to help, to really make a difference? And I just think if we can really quickly just get your thoughts, maybe a sentence or two from each of our panelists, that would be really awesome.
Just walk in my shoes, and you'll know.
get the whole community involved. It's not just the government, it's not just the person that doesn't have a home, it's not just one of the nonprofits. It's the whole darn community.
Including business.
I think we have to care, and I think we have to do more than lip service. I think we have to have the courage to stand up and really take action.
I think on the empathy side that our outsider friend shared is kind of remembering that there is no mold. That kind of where people experiencing homelessness come from, go, experience is very unique. And it can run a whole host of places and the point of appreciation and respect of experience is critical.
I think we need to fuse compassion with action.
Thank you. And on that note, thank you so much to our panelists. If you can just fill out your evaluation sheets, we'd really, really appreciate that. And if you have ideas for future panels, we would love to hear from you. So thank you again. I really appreciate your coming.
And I do have about 30 copies of our shelter referral listing, both night and day shelters. So I was sitting up here, feel free to take them and share them with anyone you want.